I'm Anna Gregor, and it's June 28th, 2024. I'm a painter based in New York City, currently pursuing my MFA in painting at Hunter College. When I'm not painting, I'm usually at a museum teaching art to high schoolers or reading art philosophy. I grew up in a rural town east of San Diego, a mountainous desert, raising goats, riding horses, pretty rural. And I was always a crafty kid growing up, but I didn't have much exposure to art. I really began to take painting seriously my junior year of high school when I took my first art history class. It was this kind of tradition of art spanning millennia that opened up the possibility for me to take this craft, this thing that I really enjoyed doing, and to pursue it as a vocation. So thank you to Mr. Colesby, my AP art history teacher, for taking me to my first museum. Too late. Growing up in a low-income household, there was, I think, the hope that I'd choose a more dependable job with a dependable income, and that's just not what painting or an art career is. So I kind of took a circuitous route through college, where I'd initially gone to study art at Occidental College in Los Angeles. About a year in, I pivoted to organic chemistry. Organic chemistry is just conducive to how my brain works. It's all pattern tracking and kind of like learning a language. But then realized after a year or so, a year and a half of doing that I couldn't imagine a life in which I was happy working as a synthetic chemist. So I dropped out, and I had been taking art classes this whole time, but I took a few months to kind of prepare a portfolio to go to a real art school in New York City. And going to school in New York at Parsons School of Design led me to another teacher who kind of opened up a world for me, a world of meaning and possibility. Arnold Klein at Parsons. He showed me that there's a form of life in which pursuing painting as a vocation was possible. And it was a life of sacrifice in a way, right? A kind of bohemian, voluntarily low-income, scrappy life, right? But that was kind of exactly what I needed to see was possible. And so now my focus is really just painting and talking about painting, and my world revolves around it, for better or worse. I wouldn't say my work explicitly deals with my biographical background. I'm more concerned with my cultural background in general, that kind of form of life, the traditions, the conventions, the expectations that we share, or share to some degree. So while being a female person who grew up pretty poor and white, right, forms my work, of course, because that's my subjectivity and I can't really see outside of it. I'm more specifically concerned with the traditions and conventions of painting, right? Which I inherited as in this particular position that I find myself. The conventions of painting, its grounding in Christianity, the inheritance of different narratives of art in the Western tradition, art as a magical object, art as imitation of the appearance of the world, art as a teleological progression towards modernist abstraction and optical purity. The burden of history on painting, I think, is pretty heavy, and we don't really, in this kind of post-medium, post-art narrative world, know where to go from there. In this current moment when all information is seemingly at our fingertips because of computers, the internet, and AI, there's this kind of simultaneity or ahistoricity that can be really disorienting, to say the least. it gives the sense that time, space, truth are fragmented, right? Or are illusions, maybe. And so in my paintings, I try to intentionally inherit these fragments, these illusions, these kind of this residue of history, and reorganize them to create something new. My biggest influences, there are probably two classes of them, painters and then writers or thinkers. In painting, it's a pretty weird bunch. I'd say early Christian icons, Philip Guston, Botticelli, Mama Anderson, Rothko, Velázquez, Jones, Snyder are kind of my pantheon. But I also want to say that I think it's wrong to name people. It's mostly individual paintings that influence me. I don't really think of painters as biographical humans. So to be more specific, I'd say Berlinguiero's Madonna and Child at the Met is something I'm thinking about a lot recently. Botticelli's Little Annunciation at the Met, that was in the Lehman Wing. Guston's Ancient Wall, Velázquez's Supper at Emmaus. The biographical human or the body of work isn't the unit of meaning for me, but rather the individual painting. To elucidate what I mean by that, I'd say look at Robert Ryman, for example. So there was this show of his late paintings at the Uptown David's Werner a few years ago, and all of the paintings when he walked in the room looked exactly the same, right? You're like, oh, these are white paintings. They're white paintings, right? And I know I have a strange way of looking at paintings. I don't think you see them until you've spent a lot of time with them, and I mean hours. And so myself and a friend with whom I go to look at paintings for durational looking, we realized that all of these paintings that looked exactly the same at first were so particular and were all doing their own thing. And so that's kind of the attitude I take towards all paintings. They're particular instances of meaning and possibility. As for writers or thinkers, as my influences, I'm a sucker for philosophies that distinguish between material and idea, like body and mind, probably because the distinction between body and mind feels really real to me. I think of myself as a mind, and I'm always kind of yearning for pure ideas, immateriality, even though I know my body is the occasion for my mind, and I wouldn't be here without it, right? So of course, Plato is very important to me. Plato gets me every time I read him. Specifically, I'd say Plato's Phaedrus, because of the relation between loving someone as merely a body and loving someone as a mind or a soul, right? And then also Plato's allegory of the cave, right? The prisoners are seeing shadows cast on a cave wall, but they think they're seeing reality, truth. But truth is outside of the cave, and ultimately in the allegory, it's the light, the sun, that is truth, and light is very important to my painting, right? It's the kind of the perfect symbol or embodiment of material in something that is almost immaterial. I just had a solo show at DDDD in New York, so I'm currently collecting myself, kind of figuring out how to go forward. The last 7 or so paintings I made for that show opened up some possibilities of how to depict space, right? How to collapse it, how to bring historical spaces or modes of representing space into the present, all while using traditional and more contemporary techniques. I've been painting these mirrors that I make out of gold leaf on a glass pane, and I etch images into them. And usually these images are drawings from historical paintings. Right now I'm kind of working on one based on an Annunciation scene by Fra Angelico. these mirrors reflect my studio through the etched image and therefore kind of reflect or mediate my present painting practice through a past image, right? A past kind of conventional art image. And I'm mostly focusing on how to do justice to these two aspects, right? Not sacrificing the historical etched image to make the reflected surroundings of my studio intelligible, and also not sacrificing the wholeness of my surroundings to the intelligibility of the etched image. It's this balance of creating a whole work by means of fragmentation while retaining the fragmentation of the whole. The biggest challenge of being an artist, I guess I'd say it's pretty much all-consuming. I feel like I'm not a very good party guest. Sometimes I'm not a very good friend, just because I would rather be working in my studio a lot of the time. Now, I love my friends, don't get me wrong, but I do think this kind of commitment, the time commitment, the mental commitment, the physical commitment, because painting can be really tiring, can narrow my engagement with the world or my perspective on life, maybe. Maybe it makes me a little less accessible to others or causes me to shut myself off from others, because I know from experience that people don't want to hear me just blab on about the painting, about painting or like art theory. So I think it can be alienating for me and for others in that sense. But I don't regret that at all. It's par for the course. I just want to be thinking seriously all the time, which can be kind of exhausting. I don't know if my younger self really needed advice, so I'm not sure what advice I'd give her if I could talk to her. I've always been lucky to have this kind of blind faith in following things that interest me, which has accounted for a lot of the detours I've taken in life, right? Like studying organic chemistry for a bit. But it makes for a really interesting life, and I wouldn't change anything, right? It's not like I want to not take the detours I took because they made me who I am. That's not to say it's been easy or that it is easy. There are a lot of sacrifices I've made and will continue to have to make because of this kind of unstable, unconventional, financially like unviable life that comes with being an artist. So I guess I'd just reassure my younger self, tell myself to keep following my nose and maybe not be too scared of the financial implications of being an artist. To be okay with not having a safety net. I'm always trying new mediums and techniques. Generally, I wouldn't call them unconventional, but maybe they're so conventional or traditional that they're now unconventional. I'm thinking of the verre églomazé technique that I use to gild the glass mirrors that I'm painting from. It's a technique of using a gelatin size, and that is how you apply the gold leaf to the glass. It's very delicate, really, really gentle application process. Because the gelatin size is water-based, you can fairly easily etch into the applied gold leaf. And it was used to make the decorative base of drinking glasses in ancient Rome. They usually had like a picture of the owner of the drinking glass and said something like "drink up and be healthy, life is short," that kind of like memento mori type vibe. And there are some of these at the Met because when the owner of the glass died, they would saw off the bottom of the glass, the part that had the gold leaf in the portrait, and they would cement it into the catacombs and use it as a grave marker. So we have a lot of them, and there are some of them at the Met, and when I saw them, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to learn how to do that, because gold reflects light, and they're so immaterial because they're on a transparent glass surface. So yeah, that's something that's a little unconventional. I also make my own traditional rabbit skin glued gesso rather than buying an acrylic gesso or an oil ground, and I've been experimenting with egg tempera and distemper, so maybe those media also are so conventional or traditional that they're now a bit unconventional. I never listen to anything when I work. I think I'm actually a bit neurotic about this, or about sound in general. I always have a white machine going in the studio or at home to drown out any distracting sounds. Sometimes, if it's a noisy day at the studio, I'll wear earplugs. And I never listen to music because I distrust how it moves my body, right? It feels like it's not me moving myself, but some like perfectly engineered pop cultural AI taste thing that's moving me. And I'm trying to avoid that kind of influence. Not that I'm not influenced by pop culture, but I don't want it to be telling me how to move or what kind of strokes to put down. Like music is great for dancing and working out, but I'd never listen to music while writing, right? Like it would interfere with my word choice, my syntax, right? And my mind needs to be focused on the form of what is unfolding in the meaning of the words before me. And I see that to be really similar to painting. There just can't be a distraction from the painting telling me what it wants. The best response someone has had to my artwork, this is tricky. I don't really like being around when people look at my work. Maybe this has to do with the fact that I don't totally see myself as responsible for them, but see myself as a mediator that kind of brings them into existence. I really anthropomorphize paintings as having a kind of will of their own. Recently, a friend, and I kind of got a kick out of this, said they were epistemologically provocative, which I like. I think I want them to ask how we know what we know, right? How we recognize what we recognize and how we make sense of what the material configuration of whatever, is in front of us. But I think the best response is when someone chooses to really look, right? Someone chooses on their own accord to sit in front of it and they're tracking the patterns that arise in it and trying to connect different aspects of it to make meaning. And because that's how I look at paintings, and I find it to be really the most rewarding thing. And so I hope that someday some people will look at my paintings like that. And I hope that people take away from my paintings that a painting is or can be an intellectual object. Not that it has to be, but that it can be, and that painters can be intellectual, right? And I don't mean an intellectual object in the way that it can be summarized by a proposition or like fully grasped or known, right? But rather that it's a meeting of mind with material, and that meaning grows from that, right? That it's not merely subjective. It's not like I'm like only associating in front of a painting, nor is it objective in the sense that I have taste and can automatically tell whether a painting is good or bad, right? I'm really interested in this idea of a painting as this kind of site of meaning making where we intersubjectively determine what is real, right? So there's this process going on in front of a painting where I'm coming to see it better and it's revealing itself to me. And so we're always grasping for this kind of thing beyond the painting that marries mind and matter, or idea and matter. And I love how Christian icons I love Christian icons because they were conceived as portals to a beyond, right? This material door or this material occasion for an immaterial divine. And I want my paintings to open up new possibilities for a beyond, right? One that's not religious or Christian, but is, still pointing to something that isn't here, but which can be approached through the mind. All right, so I don't really have any upcoming shows. I'll be participating in a couple art fairs in September, so I have time to make some stuff. Next May, I'll be graduating from Hunter, so there will be a thesis show in Lower Manhattan, so I hope everyone can come, though I know it's like a year in the future. And in the meantime, my social media, my work can be reached okay, I'm gonna just start this question over. Sorry. I don't have any big upcoming events. I'll be participating in a couple art fairs in September, so I'm working on works for those. One will be works on paper, and the others will probably be painting. And then I have my thesis show, which will be happening in, a little less than a year at Hunter. In the meantime, if anyone wants to check out my work, you can find it on www.atgregor.com. And my Instagram handle is Anna_T_Gregor. So feel free to shoot me a message if you'd want to come for a studio visit. Thank you, Stan, for this, and I enjoyed the opportunity to kind of talk about my practice.